Welcome to We the Union. This is episode 10. I'm your host, Daisha. Thank you for joining us today. First off, I want to say happy Father's Day to all of the union dads out there. Father's Day was a few days ago, so just shout out to all of the hardworking dads out there. I also want to give a huge shout out to AFSCME Local 575 member. AFSCME International recently released their list of family scholarship winners. So shout out to you. That is awesome. And hopefully your family member that won will put it to good use. And yeah, so that's all for the intro today. Let's get on to the interview. Today I am joined by someone from AFSCME International, my first guest from AFSCME International. Can you start by introducing yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Mike Sukel. I'm the Director of Organizing and Field Services for AFSCME, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. How long have you been with AFSCME International?
I've been with AFSCME for 20 years this April, and I've been
Wow.
an organizer for 30 years. Prior to that, I started with the Steelworkers Union, and I came to AFSCME when AFSCME, shortly after AFSCME moved to a more robust organizing program and to build the organizing program. So it's been here for the last 20 years.
Wow, congrats. Very long career. That's good. Okay. So, you know, organizing is very, I would say, vast, right? It's across multiple industries. So it's not just the labor movement that involves organizing, it's kind of everywhere. So I think everybody in organizing can agree that the pandemic threw things off, right? It just was not the best scenario for organizing. So, can you talk a little bit about what it's been like running an organizing program during a pandemic?
Yes, insane. I think the hardest thing about organizing, no matter what we're organizing, is the sense of isolation that we often feel in our communities now. And I think particularly for workplace organizing, the AFSCME model and the thing we really try and do is to build connections in the workplace and make sure workers are building their own organization. This is not a top-down thing, and coming together and building their leadership and determining for themselves what their priorities are and what issues they want to confront and fix. So the pandemic certainly highlighted and created many issues that working people had to deal with, but the sense of isolation just went off the charts as well, because many were isolated, even those many AFSCME members who were essential workers and still had to go to work, were still isolated in the sense of social distancing and everything that came with that. So, I think the biggest challenge from my perspective was figuring out how to overcome that and continue to bring workers together to uh, to uh, to um, build their own organization to take on the things they wanted to take on.
Right. And so, what have been some of the like sectors of work that you guys have managed to organize? Because obviously, organizing is still happening, and I know that a lot of councils have been successful. So, what are some of the sectors you guys have been kind of working on, and how have you managed to successfully organize those groups
Yeah,
during the pandemic?
yeah. I might add one thing that we did that I think was important. That we had a structure in place prior to the pandemic that we, sort of re-engaged in a very serious way as soon as the pandemic hit. So AFSCME went through a process in the last decade or so of a program called AFSCME Strong, where President Saunders in 2014 brought together leaders from across the union. We were seeing attacks all across the union. One that comes to mind for most folks is Scott Walker in Wisconsin, and the devastation that he created there by attacking workers and their rights there. so through that process, we had an AFSCME strong structure where AFSCME affiliates, both leaders and staff and local leaders were already joined together and had the opportunity to come together to share best practices. So we quickly put that structure in place, and we had organizing leadership from across the union come together via Zoom, like everyone else, but really talk about how we continue to move organizing campaigns. And I think I think as far as the industries go, it really is the same focus that we had coming prior to the pandemic. I think AFSCME members, whether they're um, employed in the public service or in the public sector or the private sector, really, are delivering public services that we all need out there every day. So whether it be in hospitals and healthcare, we've had some success there since the pandemic. We've had success in behavioral health settings, which is we're engaged in a national campaign on that front for some time prior to the pandemic. We have Cultural Workers United, which you there at Council 36 were also involved in, and in some ways really in the front end of creating that movement or engaging that movement with the fight at the Marciano Arts Foundation and then the organizing.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen a lot of progress in Cultural Workers United. We continue to connect leaders in museums and libraries across the country, and did that through Zoom and did that through other means, and to keep that organizing going. So, but it has clearly been more difficult, and we're very excited about the idea of now getting back to face-to-face organizing, because we know that's at the end of the day that's what it's going to take to, even where we won elections and won recognition, to build strong locals and demand what workers need. So on the cultural front, since the pandemic, the Philadelphia Museum of Arts organized. That was that's the Rocky Museum in Philadelphia, as folks often recall. And they started their campaign right before the pandemic when the museum shut down, and they continued to connect with one another and ended up winning their election by a wide margin. There's the Walker Museum in the Twin Cities. Workers there organized with AFSCME since the pandemic. And a number of libraries have organized. The Hillsborough Library in Oregon just won recognition, and the Niles Library in the Chicagoland area just filed with their employer for majority recognition. So I think since the pandemic, nearly 800 workers or so in cultural institutions have either organized or filed petitions, started campaigns to organize with AFSCME. So we've really seen strengthening there. And I think there was an awakening, given the insecurity. There's always been insecurity in the industry, but given the insecurity with shutdowns and layoffs, that really brought folks to a higher level of activism than they had prior to that.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, did the pandemic, like, did you see an uptick in people wanting to organize because of the pandemic?
I think, my perspective is that they're always, we have a very long history, certainly as long as I've been doing this, and for decades before, a very long history of an industry in this country of consultants who try and convince unorganized workers that they somehow are going to do better by not coming together, but by trying to make their own deal with their employer. And and the fact of the matter is, you just have less power as one worker than everyone in your workplace coming together and exercising some workplace democracy together, and exercising the power of our collectivism. But I think that veneer really fell away during the pandemic, because even the best intentioned frontline supervisors, had no power or control in the pandemic. And it made it clear to a lot of workers that the best way for us to move forward together is to organize and take advantage of our collective power. So I would say yes. I would say that the pandemic exposed the insecurities that were always there, but workers really in a more intense way look towards organizing to make those changes and protect themselves and their families.
Yeah, I think it definitely opened a lot of people's eyes, right? It something that was already like underlying at work, and the pandemic definitely just exposed it, opened everything wide up, and people started to look at some of their bosses a little differently. Like, wait a minute. So yeah, I definitely, see that happening a lot. Um, and I think that the pandemic has really brought, I wouldn't say brought, but like some of the stories you hear nowadays that have been happening in the recent months, I think have been caused a little bit by the pandemic. So, for example, I always see these photos on social media where somebody will go to a restaurant and there's a sign on the door saying, sorry, we're closed because nobody showed up to work, right? And so you have this thing where a lot of people are saying, hey, this company doesn't really care about me, my bosses don't care about me, and I'm not putting my life at risk for this minimum wage job, which is another issue, right? A separate issue of just them not being paid enough. Um, so, kind of, what do you think about all of that that's been happening recently with people walking off the job or just not showing up to work because of what's
Yeah,
happening?
you talk about gaining some perspective, huh? I mean, I think that really is what this last year and a half or so has done. And you hear this um, idea that folks are, that the American Recovery Plan is too rich and folks don't want to come back to work. And
Mm-hmm.
it really is just a crazy idea. I mean, I think the thing we got to remember is there's no such thing as a labor shortage in this country, but there are employers who are not offering a safe workplace, enough pay, and what workers need to come to work and take care of their families. So I think, as you say, it really did um, expose those situations, and I think collectively, folks are taking a lot closer look at what conditions they are willing to settle for, and what they might want to do to make changes. So I think from my perspective, it's a huge opportunity for us right now. I think it's been the last, we've been in a decline in terms of standards for working people for a very long time, but I think the last 4 or 5 years have really, have really heightened that and given the opportunity for folks to take another look even before the pandemic and organize. It's interesting, I mean, ask me. Um, since 2018, AFSCME across the country has won recognition with 50,000 workers across the country with their employers. And, so there really was a movement prior to the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
that got slowed down in terms of formal recognition and the ability to connect folks and organize. But, we saw um, workers in the state of Nevada
Yep.
collectively come together and pass collective bargaining for themselves and their families there. That created collective bargaining rights for 20,000 workers. They just got their first contract, and there still are a number of units there that have not organized yet. They were signing up and building their committees as the pandemic hit, but that first contract shows the stark difference between being organized and having a voice and a seat at the table, and not being organized. So we're seeing folks continue to organize there across the public sector. You asked earlier in terms of what types of workers are organizing, but I also think we've seen a lot of movement in the public sector where we're politically organizing to demand that, which AFSCME has always had to do historically because of labor law in this country. You have to, state by state, you have to win collective bargaining rights for public sector workers, as you know, unlike the private sector. But we've seen workers in Adams County, Colorado, 600 human service workers there. They passed an ordinance at their county council, and they recently organized with AFSCME and just won their first contract through the pandemic. They bargained for that contract and got it done. We saw workers in Charles County, Maryland, just passed a law to have the right to organize there. They're very close to majority status there now. So there are a number of places in Virginia. We just passed a statewide law. Virginia, collective bargaining was outlawed in Virginia for public sector workers in the 70s. So for 44 odd years, public sector workers have had no right to come together, even if their employers, whether it be the city or the county, wanted to provide that right and pass a law, they couldn't do it. So that was overturned, and collective bargaining was enabled for local governments. The city of Alexandria, Virginia, passed the first ordinance several weeks ago, and then just last Saturday, we were at the chambers of the Arlington County, Virginia government, which was the case that outlawed collective bargaining 44 years ago. So it's very exciting. They introduced collective bargaining, and workers there are going to exercise their right to organize. So all around the state in Virginia, at cities and counties and school districts, workers are coming together to move collective bargaining. So even in these times when it's most difficult and we have tremendous hurdles, it's also very hopeful because folks are standing up and really taking things on and being active and making a difference. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, I've read some stories where you can see that there's been an uptick in like approval of unions. So hopefully we keep going in that direction, and a lot of people will start to kind of wake up in their workplace. Um, but another huge story that has been happening for months now and is going to continue to happen is the story about Amazon. We saw recently in Birmingham where they unfortunately failed to unionize. Um, what do you think about that story? And is that something that organizers like discuss when you're coming up with the plans? You look at these other fights that are happening.
Oh yeah, it's very connected to the idea that you just raised. I think yes, public opinion of unions is up, and general polling on unions is higher than ever. But my experience in 3 decades or more is that um, even when a majority of workers, particularly in the private sector, like Amazon, even when a majority of workers want to form a union, think it's a good idea, are ready to do it, we have a union busting industry. So employers run a campaign of distortion, fear, threats, and there are no real consequences for that. I mean, if you if you're found guilty, so to speak, then you have to run another election. There really is no consequence. So I think one thing that the union's very focused on, the labor movement is very focused on, our community partners are very focused on is moving the PRO Act, which is the reform of the private sector labor law to make sure employers are held accountable and workers really have true democracy when they decide to organize. And the employers should not be involved in campaigns. It should be a decision of the workers at that company, and they should determine for themselves whether or not they want to form a union and have the ability to negotiate. So I think, I think Amazon just underscores the problem that many of us who've been organizers for a long time have recognized, and it is the bottom line is that the system is structured in a way that there's just a tremendous inequality in terms of the power and the right for workers to democratically decide whether or not they want to form a union and bargain with their employer. So we got to keep fighting for that. But we at AFSCME, and I know other unions as well, are also really looking at other ways to exercise our power to make sure our members help unorganized workers join us and have the opportunity to join us because it makes us all stronger. So for instance, I mentioned the Hillsborough Library in Oregon. Those workers weren't forced to go through a process like that forced them to jump through hoops for months and months. Our The AFSCME affiliate there, Council 75, partnered with the community and got the library board to recognize the union. The same thing in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. We had political leadership on that board. So they hired a union busting attorney, and the workers forced them to back off and not run the kind of campaign we would traditionally see. So it's important that we make those connections and support unorganized workers, particularly AFSCME members who are hopefully listening to this podcast. We got to stand up for those workers. If you work for the city or the county, those contracted workers who probably are unorganized have to have the right to join us so we can all lift standards together instead of have a race to the bottom. So that's important. I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually saw an article today about the Amazon, and it's talking about basically how turnover is a huge weapon that Amazon uses, because once you can't form a committee, right, if they all are gone within a few months, right? You're constantly having to kind of start over. So I think that definitely played a huge role in it. And, hopefully we can all kind of collectively learn from that situation, because, I think obviously everybody deserves a union, but the Amazon workers have been fighting for a very long time. So hopefully they can kind of break through and get that. So
well, and you think about, I mean, you when you think about that dynamic, the high turnover, how that makes it difficult for workers to organize. It really is our economy now. And you think about if you're not a organized worker, if you don't have a union, if you don't have a contract, and you don't like the way things are going, you have two options. You can take it, or you can quit and go try and find a better job. And our economy is just too much of that right now, where folks are always going to different jobs to try and find something better, and the standards are not what they were 40 years ago when we had the right to organize, and when we had folks stayed at a company because you could retire from there, because you could afford to buy a house, because you could afford to take care of your family, so yes, and Amazon is such a key piece of that because they're such a big part of the economy. We at AFSCME are in coalition through the AFL-CIO, supporting the unions who are engaged with Amazon workers and trying to help them organize. So we're all in. We had organizing staff help with the Bessemer, Alabama campaign, help make calls and try and support the campaign. So we think it's important, even though those workers are not, so to speak, in the jurisdiction of AFSCME. We're all in this together, and we're really supporting that effort.
yeah, and all of these kind of stories that are happening right now, I think we are definitely seeing a major point in like the labor movement and labor history. Because I don't know, I may not be old enough, but I in my lifetime haven't really seen something like this happen, where people are just like, I'm I'm over it. I'm walking off the job. You see a lot of companies who are now putting their hourly rate on the window, trying to get people to come in. Some of them have very weird, like, they're trying to they're offering weird things to try to get people to come in, like cell phones and stuff. It's very strange. But do you think that this is kind of like a major turning point in labor history, and like what can we learn from what's happening right now?
I think it can be. I think there's certainly energy and um, a higher level of agitation. Workers are fed up, and they're not just going to
Mm-hmm.
work for anything and just take it. So I think the challenge is, how do we bring focus to that, and how do we organize it in a way that we make long systemic change in this country. And you know I think it's an incredible sign what we saw happen in Georgia the last election. I
Yeah.
think continue, and that's why you see the reaction from the right trying to suppress voter rights across this country. And I think we got to continue to organize to fight back against that and build power on that. So the answer to your question is yes. I think it's a very different time in this country. I think it's a huge opportunity. I think it remains to be seen whether or not we take full advantage of that opportunity. But I can assure you that AFSCME is doing everything we can with our 1.3 million members and resources to support that kind of organizing and continue to build strength for the working class across this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I hope this trend continues and we can and build on that and organize more people. So like my last question to you, and I don't know if you can actually answer this, but if somebody does want to organize, hopefully with AFSCME, um, like specifically with AFSCME, how would you recommend they go about doing that?
Well, if they're interested in organizing, they should go to AFSCME.org. And there's a button, I want to join, and they can fill out the form there online, and then we will make sure that we connect them to the appropriate council, or state level organization or local to support them. But I think we have to be strategic about how we go about this. So that really would be my advice to workers if workers are listening to this and they're ready to organize, to do that, to talk to an organizer before you go any further, because we really we know employers are going to resist. And I think, folks just know that as an instinct, that if you talk about the union at some workplaces, there's going to be a bad reaction to it, right? So we got to have a plan, and we've got to really
Hmm.
think through who works there, who the leadership are, what the issues are, how we build our organization before there's a full public campaign. So that would be my advice. And I think workers there in the LA area can reach directly out to Council 36, I'm sure, but also the AFSCME website is a place where you can make sure you get a contact if you sign up.
Yep. So hopefully any workers out there listening take that advice. Yeah. So thank you for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that we can absolutely continue this trend of organizing and being more united in the workplace and making sure that it is safe for everybody and benefits people so that people aren't struggling anymore, right? Nobody wants to do that anymore. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me.
Thank you for doing this. I appreciate you having me, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much for joining me today on episode 10. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Hopefully, we can inspire more people to fight for their workplaces and better their workplaces by joining and forming a union in their workplaces. And if you are currently in a fight to organize, keep up the hard work. We know it can be difficult, but keep it up, because in the end, it'll work out and things will get better. All right, everybody, I will see you next time.